Stop reacting to everything. The pause principle inspired by Epictetus. Most of us go through life reacting automatically to everything around us. Someone criticizes us and we instantly feel defensive. A message is ignored and we assume the worst. A small inconvenience ruins our entire mood. These reactions feel natural, almost unavoidable, but they often create unnecessary stress and conflict. Over 2,000 years ago, the Stoic philosopher taught a simple but powerful idea that can transform the way we deal with situations like these. He explained that what truly disturbs us is not the events themselves, but our judgments about them. In other words, the problem is rarely the event. The problem is how quickly we react to it. Most people believe life works in a very simple pattern. Something happens, and then we react. Someone says something rude, and we get angry. Something goes wrong, and we panic. But Stoic philosophy reveals that there is actually an invisible step between what happens and how we respond. The real process is this. First there is the event, then our interpretation of that event, and finally our reaction. Our minds immediately create a story about what happened, often without us even realizing it. That story determines our emotional response. For example, imagine you send a message to a friend and they do not reply for several hours. The event itself is simple. They have not responded yet. But your mind may quickly create a story such as they are ignoring me or they must be upset with me. That interpretation triggers anxiety or frustration, even though nothing negative has actually been confirmed. Epictetus believed that recognizing this hidden step gives us an extraordinary kind of freedom. If our emotions come from our interpretations, then we have the ability to question those interpretations. Instead of reacting instantly, we can pause and observe what is really happening. This small pause creates space between the stimulus and our response. In that space, we gain the ability to choose how we want to act instead of simply reacting out of habit or emotion. The Stoics considered this pause one of the most important skills a person could develop because it allows reason to guide behavior instead of impulse. The reason most people struggle with this is that our brains are wired for speed. From an evolutionary perspective, quick reactions helped our ancestors survive. If something moved in the bushes, it was safer to react immediately than to spend time analyzing the situation. However, modern life rarely requires that kind of instant reaction. Instead of wild animals, our triggers are emails, comments, delays, and misunderstandings. Yet our minds still respond as if every situation is a threat. We react emotionally before thinking clearly, and those quick reactions often damage relationships, create unnecessary arguments, or make situations worse. This is where the pause principle becomes so valuable. The pause principle simply means inserting a brief moment of awareness between the stimulus and the response. That moment might last only a few seconds, but it allows the emotional wave to settle before we act. Instead of moving directly from event to reaction, the process becomes event, pause, and then response. During that pause, we have the opportunity to examine our thoughts and choose a more thoughtful reaction. It is a small shift, but it dramatically changes the way we interact with the world. Consider a common example. Someone criticizes your work during a meeting. The automatic reaction might be to defend yourself immediately, interrupt them, or respond with frustration in many cases. That reaction only escalates the situation, but if you pause for a moment, something interesting happens. The emotional intensity decreases slightly, and you regain the ability to think clearly. Instead of reacting defensively, you might respond calmly by asking them to explain their feedback. This simple shift turns a confrontation into a productive conversation. The pause transforms the situation. Practicing the pause principle does not require complicated techniques. In fact, it can begin with something as simple as taking one slow breath when you feel emotionally triggered. When you notice anger, irritation, or anxiety starting to rise, that is your signal to pause. Instead of immediately responding, take a moment to breathe and observe your thoughts. Ask yourself a simple question. What is actually happening here? This question helps separate facts from the stories our minds create. Often you will discover that the situation is less serious than it initially felt. Another helpful question during the pause is, What response would make me proud later? When emotions are high, the reaction that feels satisfying in the moment is not always the wisest choice. By thinking about how you want to look back on the situation later, you shift your focus from immediate emotion to long-term character. This perspective encourages responses that are calmer, more thoughtful, and more aligned with your values. Over time, practicing the pause principle changes how you experience daily life. Situations that once triggered strong reactions begin to feel more manageable. You start noticing your emotional responses earlier, before they fully take control, instead of being pulled into every conflict or frustration. You become more selective about how you respond. People around you may even notice that you appear calmer and more difficult to provoke. This is not because you no longer feel emotions, but because you have learned to create space before acting on them. The Stoics believed that true strength lies in self-control. External events are often beyond our control, but our responses are always within our power. By learning to pause, we reclaim that power. We stop allowing every comment, inconvenience, or misunderstanding to dictate our mood. Instead, we begin responding intentionally, guided by reason rather than impulse. In the end, the pause principle reminds us that we always have a choice. Between the moment something happens and the moment we respond, there is a brief space where awareness can exist. Inside that space lies our freedom to decide how. We want to act. As Epictetus taught, events themselves do not disturb us, our judgments about them do. When we learn to pause and examine those judgments, we gain control over reactions that once felt automatic. And with practice, that simple pause becomes the key to a calmer, wiser, and more deliberate life.